Very well. I'll start with my opening statement, Mr. Shirley, so you can relax for a little bit.
Thank you.
The Marine Mammal Protection Act has a tremendous impact on the lives and livelihoods of the thousands of Maine lobstermen and fishermen I have the privilege to represent. I have serious concerns with the MMPA, and I believe that changes need to be made to the law to ensure it does not end up shutting down entire fisheries in the communities that they support. Simply put, the federal government should not be in the business of destroying the livelihoods of hardworking Americans based on assumptions that are not firmly grounded in sound data. It was only 3 years ago that Maine's lobster industry was on the verge of shutting down because of a regulatory process that was based on biased modeling that relied heavily on hypothetical threats posed to the right whales by the lobster fishery. That's why Congress enacted a moratorium on these regulations until 2028, coupled with additional funding to support additional right whale research. However, based on my conversations with fishermen, more time is going to be needed to incorporate that research and data collected during this pause before we move to future right whale regulations. Now, it remains the case that Maine lobstermen don't pose an existential threat to the North Atlantic right whale. In the decades since Congress and the government has begun tracking the cause of marine mammal serious injury and mortality, there's only been one instance where Maine lobster gear has been attributed to a right whale death, even though that linkage remains contested and in question. Maine lobstermen have a proven track record of leading the way when it comes to ocean resource conservation and mitigating risk to whale entanglements, including the adoption of weak links and gear marking. I want to point out that this draft bill from Mr. Begich makes clear that, as Congress has always intended, MMPA decisions should be based on the best available data without application of what is known as the precautionary principle. This would align with the D.C. Circuit Court's opinion in Maine Lobstermen's Association versus NMFS, where the court held that NMFS's decision to indulge in worst-case scenarios and use pessimistic values in order to give the benefit of the doubt to the species was not just wrong, but egregiously wrong. The court explained when the Congress wants an agency to apply the precautionary principle, it says so. The precautionary principle, taken seriously, can multiply an agency's power over the economy and allow an agency to regulate or veto activities even if it cannot be shown those activities are likely to produce significant harms. When the service applies a substantial presumption to distort the analysis, the public can have no confidence that economic dislocation is needed to protect a species and is not the result of speculation or surmise by overly zealous agency officials. This reasoning would apply equally to the MMPA, one might think, since there's no language in the law directing NMFS to use the precautionary principle. I think a very important point here that we have been coming back to again and again and again, not just before the regulatory pause that Congress put in place in 2022, but in the last several months, is that NMFS and fishermen need more time, in part because the court order forced regulators to go back to the drawing board. The Atlantic large whale take reduction team won't hold its first meeting on new regulations until 2026. So if the moratorium expires in 2028, lobstermen will have insufficient time to work in a good faith way to plan for new regulations and may well find themselves unable to comply and thereby forced to stop fishing entirely. So to close with my first 5 minutes here, I would ask unanimous consent to submit into the record a letter from fishermen on both coasts in support of the MMPA discussion draft. Signatories of the letter include constituents from the Maine Lobstering Union, Maine Lobster Association, New England's Fishermen's Stewardship Association, and Down East Lobstermen's Association, if I could have that read into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
At that point, I would yield back the rest of Mr. Webster's time. Thank you.
I now recognize Mr. Golden for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks for holding the hearing. I guess, Mr. Shirley, I want to hear your thoughts on the court's opinion as it related to Maine Lobstermen Association versus NMFS course, this was having to do with the ESA, but specifically where they ruled that the precautionary principle was not really an authority given to NMFS under the ESA. How is NMFS now looking at that in light of the MMPA, given that there's no language, statutory language, that would ask you to apply that? In fact, it specifically requires that the agency objectively apply statutory standards based on the best available data.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you for that question. I for sure don't want to speak for the National Marine Fisheries Service in regards to that question, but you know, a lot of it still ties to the act itself. And so in not speaking to their side of that, I would just say that, you know, as we dive in again in a discussion draft of what this looks like, there's a lot that we should consider as a committee together to make sure that we're meeting the conservation goals of those marine mammals, and that we're able to work together with industry and partners to be able to further that work. And I think that falls in line with administration's priorities as well as what the service wants to do. We want win-win situations.
Thank you. Originally, the Maine delegation was seeking 10 years of relief when Congress enacted the moratorium back in 2022. There was some pushback there. We ended up with 6. It's our feeling that that is going to create a pretty condensed timeline on the backside, particularly because part of that moratorium provided money to the federal government here to go out and try and get more accurate data rather than relying on assumptions about whale activities and also impact with fishing gear or fishing practices. Do you have any concerns about what that timeline is going to look like, given the fact that we didn't get the full 10, but rather only 6 in what could be a pretty condensed timeline with the TRT process, which is waiting and starting late, specifically because it's waiting for that new data and the money to go out and get that data to be put to good use? I think failure, you know, to allow for a good runway here means that money spent in the collection of that data will be rather useless.
Thank you. That's a great question. And what I would ask to be able to be done is let me get with NIMS and get some background on the information and how the decisions were made, and then we can follow up and get back to you on that if that's okay.
I would appreciate that very much. It would be, you know, my hope that they would take the opportunity, given the funding from Congress and the clear mandate here, with both the moratorium and the money to go out and get the information, that they would want to make sure that it's done right, get it right this time, and see that the process is fair, is going to make, you know, use of the very best, as like the laws instruct, the best available data. Like, let's go out and get it and not rely on this modeling in the absence of it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. I yield back my time.